The Book of Jonah, the prophet who tried to ghost God. Spoiler, it didn't work. The Book of Jonah is the classic tale of a guy who tries to run from God's plan and ends up in the belly of a giant fish. If you've ever tried to avoid something difficult, like, I don't know, homework or texting someone back, you'll relate to Jonah. He's the prophet version of nope, not doing this. And then life, or in his case, God, throws him into a wild adventure. Jonah's story is short, just 4 chapters, but packed with humor, drama, and a valuable lesson about mercy. Let's dive into Jonah's fishy tale, where we learn what happens when you try to run from God and how God's mercy is way bigger than Jonah or anyone else could ever imagine. Chapter 1, Jonah's great escape plan that totally fails. The book kicks off with God telling Jonah, go to Nineveh, that big bad city full of wicked people, and tell them they need to change their ways. You'd think Jonah, being a prophet, would say, sure thing, God, I'm on it. But nope. Jonah's like, nah, I'm good. And instead of heading to Nineveh, he books it in the opposite direction. He hops on a boat to Tarshish, trying to put as much distance between him and Nineveh as possible. Let's pause here. Jonah's literally trying to outrun God. That's like trying to play hide and seek with someone who already knows all your hiding spots. It's not going to end well. So Jonah's sailing off into the sunset, thinking he's gotten away, but then, surprise, God sends a massive storm. The sailors on the boat freak out, and Jonah's taking a nap, because of course he is. The crew wakes him up, and they cast lots, a biblical version of who's to blame. And guess what? The lot falls on Jonah. Jonah fesses up. Yeah, this is totally my fault. I'm running from God. Just toss me overboard and the storm will stop. At first, the sailors don't want to do it, but eventually, they throw him into the sea, and just like that, the storm calms down. Meanwhile, Jonah, he gets swallowed by a giant fish. Talk about a plot twist. Chapter 2, Jonah's underwater timeout. So Jonah's chilling in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And while he's in there, he has some time to think. In chapter 2, we get Jonah's prayer, where he basically says, okay, God, you win. I'm sorry. I'll do what you asked. The prayer is pretty poetic, considering Jonah's sitting in a fish's digestive system. He thanks God for rescuing him from drowning and acknowledges that only God can save him. He ends his prayer with a promise. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. Jonah 2 verse 9. Then, in one of the most unceremonious exits in the Bible, the fish vomits Jonah onto dry land. Lovely. Chapter 3, Jonah's reluctant mission and a surprise twist. Now that Jonah's had some time to reflect and been spat out of a fish, he finally heads to Nineveh, the city he was supposed to go to in the first place. He walks into town and delivers the shortest sermon ever. 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Jonah 3 verse 4. That's it. No flashy words, no passion. Just a simple, you've got 40 days, tick-tock. But here's the crazy part. The people of Nineveh actually listen. They immediately start repenting, putting on sackcloth, the ancient equivalent of saying, I'm really sorry, and fasting. Even the king of Nineveh gets in on it, issuing a decree for everyone to turn from their evil ways. They don't just hope for the best. They hope that God will change his mind and spare them. And guess what? God does. He sees their repentance and shows them mercy. He doesn't destroy the city after all. You'd think Jonah would be pumped about this, right? Wrong? Chapter 4, Jonah's meltdown. Because God is too nice? Instead of celebrating the fact that an entire city just turned to God, Jonah throws a pity party. He's actually mad that God showed mercy to Nineveh. In Jonah 4 verse 2, he says, I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Jonah's basically saying, I knew you'd forgive them. And that's why I didn't want to come here in the first place. It's like Jonah wanted a front row seat to the fireworks show of Nineveh's destruction, and now he's disappointed that it didn't happen. So Jonah sulks outside the city, and God decides to teach him a little lesson in compassion. God causes a plant to grow up over Jonah, providing him with some much-needed shade. Jonah's super happy about the plant, but then God sends a worm to eat the plant, and the sun starts beating down on Jonah again. Jonah's so upset that he says he wants to die, and that's when God drops the truth bomb. He asks Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the plant? Jonah's like, yeah, it is, really doubling down on the whole sulking thing. Then God says, you've been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people? Jonah 4 verses 10 to 11. Boom, mic drop. God's like, Jonah, if you care so much about a plant, shouldn't I care about all these people? So in conclusion, Jonah, the prophet who learned mercy the hard way, The book of Jonah isn't just a story about a runaway prophet and a big fish. It's a story about God's mercy, both for a sinful city and for Jonah himself. Jonah's mission to Nineveh shows us that no one is beyond God's forgiveness, not even a city as messed up as Nineveh. But it's also a reminder to us that sometimes we might not fully understand or agree with God's plans, and that's okay. What's important is that we learn to trust Him, even when things don't go the way we want. And like Jonah, we might have to learn the hard way that God's mercy is bigger than our judgments. Now you made it to the end. Welcome to Modern Testament Talks, Faith Foundation's journaling and drawing activity. Today's topic, you guessed it, the book of Jonah. Feel free to pause at any time so you can answer these questions without rushing it. Jonah tried to run from God's plan, but God didn't give up on him. Have you ever tried to avoid something God was calling you to do? What happened? How does God's mercy toward Nineveh challenge the way you think about forgiveness and second chances? In Jonah's story, God shows compassion to both the people of Nineveh and Jonah himself. How can you show more compassion in your own life, even when it's hard? Write about a time when you didn't want to forgive someone but knew that God was calling you to do so. How did you eventually handle the situation? How did it feel afterward, knowing you followed God's lead? Draw Jonah's journey, starting with the storm, the giant fish, and ending with him sitting outside Nineveh under the plant. How would you depict Jonah's emotions at each point in the story, especially his surprise and frustration at God's mercy? Jonah's story reminds us that running from God's plans never works out, but even when we fail, God's mercy is always waiting for us, and for everyone else too. Chapter 2, Jonah's underwater timeout. So Jonah's chilling in the belly of a fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And while he's in there, he has some time to think. In chapter 2, we get Jonah's prayer, where he basically says, "Okay, God, you win. I'm sorry. I'll do what you asked." The prayer is pretty poetic, considering Jonah's sitting in a fish's digestive system. He thanks God for rescuing him from drowning and acknowledges that only God can save him. He ends his prayer with a promise. "What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord." Jonah 2 verse 9. Then, in one of the most unceremonious exits in the Bible, the fish vomits Jonah onto dry land. Lovely. Chapter 3, Jonah's reluctant mission. And a surprise twist. Now that Jonah's had some time to reflect and been spat out of a fish, he finally heads to Nineveh, the city he was supposed to go to in the first place. He walks into town and delivers the shortest sermon ever. 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. Jonah 3 verse 4. That's it. No flashy words, no passion. Just a simple, "You've got 40 days." Tick-tock. But here's the crazy part. The people of Nineveh actually listen. They immediately start repenting, putting on sackcloth, the ancient equivalent of saying, "I'm really sorry," and fasting. Even the king of Nineveh gets in on it, issuing a decree for everyone to turn from their evil ways. They don't just hope for the best. They hope that God will change his mind and spare them. And guess what? God does. He sees their repentance and shows them mercy. He doesn't destroy the city after all. You'd think Jonah would be pumped about this, right? Wrong. Chapter 4, Jonah's meltdown. Because God is too nice? Instead of celebrating the fact that an entire city just turned to God, Jonah throws a pity party. He's actually mad that God showed mercy to Nineveh. In Jonah 4 verse 2, he says, "I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." Jonah's basically saying, "I knew you'd forgive them. And that's why I didn't want to come here in the first place." It's like Jonah wanted a front row seat to the fireworks show of Nineveh's destruction, and now he's disappointed that it didn't happen. So, Jonah sulks outside the city, and God decides to teach him a little lesson in compassion. God causes a plant to grow up over Jonah, providing him with some much-needed shade. Jonah's super happy about the plant, but then God sends a worm to eat the plant, and the sun starts beating down on Jonah again. Jonah's so upset that he says he wants to die, and that's when God drops the truth bomb. He asks Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" Jonah's like, "Yeah, it is," really doubling down on the whole sulking thing. Then God says, "You've been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people?" Jonah 4 verses 10 to 11. Boom. Mic drop. God's like, "Jonah, if you care so much about a plant, shouldn't I care about all these people?" So in conclusion, Jonah, the prophet who learned mercy the hard way. The book of Jonah isn't just a story about a runaway prophet and a big fish. It's a story about God's mercy, both for a sinful city and for Jonah himself. Jonah's mission to Nineveh shows us that no one is beyond God's forgiveness, not even a city as messed up as Nineveh. But it's also a reminder to us that sometimes we might not fully understand or agree with God's plans, and that's okay. What's important is that we learn to trust Him, even when things don't go the way we want. And like Jonah, we might have to learn the hard way that God's mercy is bigger than our judgments.